Hello there. Welcome to the IWS podcast. I am your host, RJ, and this is take 2 on my interview with my lovely guest, Camila. Camila, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's been quite an adventure.
Yes, this is our second time trying to do this today for those who are probably not going to see the first side. But we are here. We're here. We're going to talk about mental health. We're going to talk about family. We're going to talk about upbringing and culture. And we're all going to learn much, much more about my guest. So I want to start, of course, like I always do, by talking and learning more about you, Camila, and your upbringing and your family. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with us who are watching, how would you describe your family upbringing and who were you around in your early years?
For sure. Thank you for having me on. And to answer your question, I would say I had a pretty stable family life.
Family and upbringing.
Family and upbringing. So I would say I had a pretty stable upbringing. I lived with both my parents, my mom and dad, and my older brother. And my grandmother and my uncle lived about 15 minutes away.
Okay.
So relatively close. I have a lot of family, but we're the only ones in London. The rest of them are back in Colombia and Spain, some in the US.
So everybody's spread out.
Everyone's quite spread out, yeah. And one thing that I can definitely say is my parents provided quite a loving home.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, what I can remember was there was always stuff that I was doing. It was an active childhood.
Okay.
And then my dad went on holiday to Colombia when I was 8, and he didn't come back.
Okay.
So I remember just sitting on the floor and thinking when is my dad coming back? Is this guy gonna turn up? What's going on?
Do you remember, I know you said that happened when you're 8. Do you remember how long it took before you asked that question? How long maybe he had been gone before you're like, is dad coming home?
So I had a phone conversation with him, and he's like, I'm going to be there for your birthday. So he was meant to come a few weeks before my birthday, and he didn't. And he goes, I'll be there for your birthday. I said, okay. And then I honestly can't remember how long after, but it wasn't too long after. I was like, where is he? And my mom sat me down and was like, I don't think he's coming back.
When's your birthday?
May 22nd.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that happened. You're waiting, hoping. Don't hear anything. Mom sits you down, says, he's might not going to be back here anytime soon. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then how does that impact you, moving forward?
Well, it was strange because I kind of made the decision in that moment, well, I don't need him anyway. If he doesn't want to be here, well, fine. I can do this on my own.
Yeah. Because
the relationship I had with my dad was really special. I was a proper daddy's girl. Mm-hmm. We would do everything together. We were inseparable.
Yeah.
He was my go-to guy. If I had any issues at school, if I had any issues with friends, I would confide in him, and he would sort it out.
Yeah.
And so when he left, it was kind of shit. I'm basically on my own. And so the dynamic at home obviously changed.
Sure.
Because mum had to start working a lot more. My brother's a lot older than me. He's 8 years older than me, but it's quite a significant gap when you're 8 years old.
Yeah. I would say at any age, you put 8 years, that almost feels like another generation almost.
No, definitely. So he was at a different stage in life completely. And so it just meant mum was working a lot, so I had to live with my grandmother for a while. For about 5 years I was living with her, maybe a little bit longer. And I just felt like I didn't really have my mum around because she was working so much. So at one point I really, really despised her for it. I would blame her, and I would say stuff like, oh, you're choosing work over spending time with me. Mm-hmm. And she'll do stuff like buy me gifts or take me on short holidays, and I'll be like this doesn't make it okay.
Right.
I would literally as a 10, 11-year-old, I'd be like, this doesn't make it okay. You can't buy me this necklace and think we're friends. It was bad.
It's interesting you say that too, because I think and I won't say for everybody, but I think there's times where, just to give an example, some people, choose to show love in that way, like providing gifts. But I also think, to your point about maybe mom recognizing that I can't physically be present as much, so maybe this is something that kind of makes her feel valued, in that it's not like I don't want to be around you, but given our circumstances, I have to do a lot to take care of us. But I hope that that I do love and appreciate you. So here's this, and then whatever she may have given you.
I think, as adults, we kind of discover, especially once you like start having romantic relationships, that we all have individual love languages.
Yes.
Yes. And if you don't know what your love language is, I would highly recommend that you check it out.
Very important.
And if you have a partner, start inquiring as to what their love language is.
Yes.
But something I've also discovered is that kids also have their love languages. Like kids have a particular way, and as they grow, it might change.
Oh yeah.
As they go through different phases, they'll have particular ways of how they want to be shown love. So mine was definitely spending like quality time.
That's my number one as well.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I definitely agree with you there.
Mine's more, now it's different. But back then it was definitely quality time. And so I wasn't getting that from like my two primary carers, which were mum and dad.
Yeah.
I got that from my abuelita.
Right.
So it was a different dynamic, because I lived at home with Nan, and she had quite bad paranoia. So I felt like I couldn't really like get away with stuff. Like I couldn't play outside with the other kids. I wasn't allowed. Like she lived in the absolute ghetto. Like I was not allowed out, because it was not safe. So she would keep me like locked indoors.
Yeah.
I remember doing stuff like waking up at like 5:30 in the morning so that I could be at school for like 7:30. So I'd have like a whole hour to just like read or be with my friends, just to get away from the house. It was crazy. Yeah.
No, and it's interesting you talk about that. Like I can imagine, like we kind of talked about before, the generational gap when you're being raised by grandparents. Like they come up in different ways. Even the way our parents would treat us would be different, and the dynamic between, like you mentioned before, about how you and your mom were. Mom being a doctor, having to be maybe on these longer shifts and gone all the time, can leave a young person to have a lot of idle time. Not saying you did, but many get into some mischievous acts or being rebellious or, adventurous spirits.
Oh, I definitely did.
Okay. And then at the same time, though, then, like you said, that putting that dynamic against grandma saying, yeah, I don't want you really doing any of those things. Like that must have been challenging, trying to navigate that. Like, okay, I have some freedom sometimes and sometimes I don't. How did you find a way to like manage that successfully?
I would lie a lot. I would say like I'm at this after school club, and I would be like out with friends until as late as I possibly could get away with. And then it got to an age where I was like 13, 14, discovering boys. And I was like, I need to go back home because I need some freedom, because I really like this getting home for like 4:30 p.m. does not work for me. Like it's unworkable right now, the life that I want to live.
Yeah.
So I told mom like I'm willing to work on our relationship if I can move back home. And so it worked for a bit. She was still doing like crazy shifts.
Yeah.
Coming home at like 8, 9. But it just meant I had a little bit more freedom to do as I pleased.
That's fair. And I mean, I know you had talked about this before as well. And I came from a similar environment with my dad being the main person that took care of me and my older sister. But my older sister was the one that tried to be kind of the steward and make sure that I was being responsible when my dad had to do those 12, 14, 15, 16-hour shifts. So there was some accountability, but also there was like a great sense of fear. So like I never even want to get caught trying to do something, so you just don't try to do anything for a long time. So that wasn't as much of an issue because there was a healthy level of intimidation. But to your point, though, when you have that level of freedom, it is very tempting, right? To maybe, and then we're young, so we're impulsive. Greater chance we're going to just maybe get into some stuff we got no business doing, but it's like, hey, nobody's telling me not to. So I can definitely appreciate that. And I think it's interesting in trying to conceptualize why it's so important, to your point in the beginning of this conversation, about having both of those parents being present, because it's easier to make sure somebody's being present. It's easier to make sure we have structure and the children are being cared for versus everybody having to be gone.
Right.
And it's kind of like, hey, be responsible and do what you're supposed to do at 12, 13, 14. Very, very unlikely that a young person's going to be like, yes, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. I'm just going to do exactly what you told me, even though nobody's watching me for 8 or 9 hours a day. Do you think, was any part of that happening for you?
I feel like by nature, I'm very adventurous and I love being out with people. And I have like a mischievous sort of flair to my way of being. That's always been there. I don't think that's the case for like all kids. I think some kids are like genuinely a lot more calmer. And,
Sure.
But the fact that I found a way, excuse me, to create space and time for me to just get up to things that I wanted to get up with.
Yeah.
And they weren't always bad things.
Sure.
Sometimes I just wanted to hang out with the girls, or sometimes I just wanted to hang out in the park, you know?
Yeah. No, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it just kind of gives I always talk about like these good lived examples that we have sometimes. You know, we all have different life experiences and different family dynamics and circumstances, right? Some of us have mom in the house, some of us have dad in the house, some of us have neither, and we live with a guardian or another loved one. To me, the point and the essence of what we're talking about here is the value of making sure that we have those two people, even if they're not in the house, right? Just collaboratively working together to make sure that the family unit as a whole is very stable. And then, you know, again, so when we remove one of those people, when one of those people are not here, in your dad's case, it can be difficult on the children because, yeah, the freedom's awesome when we're young. But usually there's also greater risk of, you know, getting in trouble, doing things we're not supposed to be doing. And so I always just like to echo that point, that even though I'm sure from your perspective, it was awesome to have that level of freedom, sometimes I found like in my time, like mentoring and working with young people, they get into situations that they otherwise would not have. If dad was there, if mom was there, if an older sibling was there as well to sort of help reinforce some of the rules, they probably wouldn't get, you know, caught up with like legal issues or drugs, maybe having relations with a young woman or a young man, very young age. And so I just think, you know, sometimes it can set us up for some situations we might not really be ready for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of what you said has like resonates because, like I reflecting back, there was a lot of situations that I put myself in that if I would have had like a solid foundation, or if I would have maybe like not been such an angry young adult teen, I could have avoided a lot of hurt and damage and self-infliction to myself and to others, really.
Sure. And to be fair to you, you know, this is not to, you know, to put all this blame on you. It's more just, especially to me from the mental health side, it's just trying to understand why maybe we made some of the choices that we made. Sometimes the environments and the conditions that we're in make it easy to not always do the right things, right? It's like when you were mentioning earlier about your grandmother. Some of us come from like very hard environments, you know, like you might see, you know, like if you're living in poverty, you might see people, you know, just struggling to survive. So they may be engaging in illegal activities to try to make do, right? And if I'm growing up in that environment, well, then that stuff becomes very normal to me. I'm not looking at it like, oh, you're a terrible person because you sold drugs or because you prostituted yourself or because you were, you know, doing anything else that some people would deem illegal or unnecessary. That doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. It's just, why do we do what we do? How do we get into these situations that we're in right now? That's what I think is the most important when it comes to understanding why that family dynamic is so important. I need to know why my environment shaped me into who I am, into why I see the world the way that I do. So you got to start by the family of origin. Who kicked this whole thing off for me? So I think it's important, like we always take that step back and really look at who raised me and who shaped me, right? So speaking on that, how would you describe, because you've already talked a little bit about your family and your parents so far, how would you describe your relationship, since you have that age gap, with your older brother?
My relationship with my brother, for the most part, that is my best friend. Like, that is my homie for real. I can really confide in him with anything. Growing up, I idolized him a lot. He's my only sibling, and he's 8 years older than me, so you can imagine, as a young child,
Yeah.
I just idolize. Like, he's genuinely extremely smart, good at everything he puts his mind to, and such a people person.
Yeah.
That for me, it was like, oh my god, I want to be just like him. And then when dad left, it impacted him in a very different way.
Sure.
Because he was late teen. He was 16. And so for him, it was like, all right, I need to man up now and look after my family. I need to be the one that, my sister and my mum can turn to.
Right.
Which I can't even imagine what it's like as a 16-year-old to feel that burden almost.
It's a pretty heightened level of responsibility, right?
Most definitely. And so I think our relationship changed for a while because I wanted to do stuff that he would never have just let slide. So I feel like I lived a very secretive life for a few years.
Yeah.
And he was very much in the dark, and I was I became very distant from my family in general. But he saved my ass in so many occasions. So I think when I got to an age where I was able to really reflect on life, and I was at a space where I was actively healing just all this trauma that I had dealt with.
Yeah.
Dad leaving being one of them. I was able to really rekindle our friendship firstly, and then secondly our brother sisterhood.
Yeah.
And he's amazing. I love him so much. Like I said, he really is my best friend.
No, that's beautiful. And part of the reason, thank you for sharing that. Part of the reason why I asked that is because I always think about the impact of when somebody is growing up without one of their primary parents, that we know there's going to be some level of deficit. So if I'm you potentially, and my father's not there, but I do have this brother who is a bit older than me, doesn't mean he is my father, but clearly, based on what you said, sounds like he wanted to step up to the plate and create some level of accountability to you, maybe trying to demonstrate a good role model or trying to be some type of male example. I think that that's awesome when you have that, right? Because I've seen what happens when you don't, and then you go look for it elsewhere. You start looking for it outside of the home.
Definitely.
Because you can't get it, right? It's kind of like, to give a quick example, for those that may not know, in certain situations, why young men may pursue being involved in gangs. Not always, but in many cases it's because they are coming from fatherless homes where they're searching for that paternal love and affection and energy, and there's nobody around to give it to them. And then you have somebody who's here, I'll give you that love, just stand on the corner and do this for me. And they'll do it because they really want to fulfill that hole that they're experiencing, but they don't really know how to do it, right? But when you have somebody there, right? So if you had that same example, but it's hey, but my older brother is here. He's hey man, come over here. We don't need that. Come here. Whatever happens between this day forward, I'm going to have your back. I understand, dad's not here, but I'm here and I can give you some of that, right? That to me is so powerful. So if we can identify people in our life that might want to assist with that, or just allow them maybe to be that for us, we can be at least a little bit more well-adjusted than if we didn't have that and we have the deficit of that person not being there, if that makes sense.
It's interesting what you're saying. I hadn't really considered it like that.
Yeah.
What came to mind for me was this is so unfair on a 16-year-old to take this burden on
yeah,
he could just be a 16-year-old.
True.
And
very
for
true.
me it's his mistakes were 10 times worse because he felt he was responsible,
right?
so it's
right.
He can't even be a teenager, he can't even experience like basically messing up in life, like we all do, because he just has like this extra burden of like, I need to show up all the time.
Oh yeah.
Which I think like it has its pros and its cons, but it's such a catch-22.
No, absolutely. And one of the reasons why part of the reason why I said to you what I said to you about your older brother. So I have an older sister, and she's 4.5 years older than me. And because I grew up without my mother because she passed away when I was really young, my sister tried to do that for me. And I always have a lot of love and respect for her because, I mean, the gap was like half of as big as you and your brother. But, you know, she tried the best that she could. And I always have a lot of respect because that's exactly what you were just describing. You take on this level of accountability that is really not your duty, right? But you just feel like, you know, I'm maybe the closest thing you're going to have right now. So let me do what I can, you know? So it's easier for me to like relate to your brother in that way to say like, man, commend him for trying to do that for you. Cause that's how I feel like what my sister tried to do for me. So shout out to the older siblings out there who step in and try to do that, even though it's not fair. But the point is, if we can identify people in our lives that may assist us in those ways, I think it's awesome if we allow ourselves to let them in.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, you older siblings, you guys are built different. Really, like I take my hats off because I don't know if I was ever built to be an older sibling.
No, it's and it's strange too, like. Because, you know, sometimes I've learned from some families that I've worked with over the years, like some people, like let's say like in same scenario, like your dad walks away or is gone for some reason, one reason or another. Sometimes mom will sit the older sibling down. Listen, son, listen, sweetheart, for the daughter, I need you to step up. Like I need you to, like I'm telling you, I need this from you. And it may not be fair, but just given the circumstances, I could really use your assistance with your younger sibling. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes just like, I'm just kind of noticing that nobody's talking to you about these things, or that you seem like you're very isolated. So something just calls to me to try to be there for you. So that's why I thought maybe that's happening for you, but I don't know if that's to be true or not. So.
Was there a conversation had?
Sometimes I've seen scenarios where sometimes I've actually been able to be a part of it and say, you know, like let's say in the same scenario, let's say there's like a slightly smaller age gap. Maybe it's like 3 or 4 years. I've seen it where they will talk to the older sibling and say, hey, listen, I know that you have a lot going on. I know you're trying to also process whatever we're dealing with as a family. It would be great if you felt so impassioned to take a little extra responsibility and try to look out for your younger brother, younger sister. It's easier, I've noticed, if it's like an older sister with a young girl, or an older brother with a young boy. It is a little trickier when it's opposite gender. But I have seen that. I do think that it is helpful. But it's even more difficult when there is no conversation. Right. You're just kind of observing things. You're just like, man, my sister looks sad all the time. She's staring off at the door all the time. And then, like what you were saying earlier, when's daddy coming back? Because he told me he was going to come for my birthday. I have to imagine, obviously I don't know, I'm not the older sibling, but I have to imagine like they're observing some part of that experience. And maybe they're thinking like, okay, so what could I do? Like, how could I try to be of some assistance, or how could I try to even help in the situation? So it's very difficult to navigate. Like anytime you are missing a parent, these are just some of the complexities we're outlining right now, but there's so many more.
Right.
So I just think it's important to point that stuff out. But speaking on that aspect, do you think from that experience, what you were going through, did any of that ever propel you from that age up until now to ever go get some professional help to actually discuss it in more detail?
I was like lucky enough to have people around me that were like, you need to seek help. Like I never had that self-realization where I said to myself, the situation is bad. Like what I'm going through is not normal. What I feel is not normal, and I should probably seek help. I was just blessed enough to have people around me that continuously asked me to get help. And when I decided to, so I had like a school counselor throughout my school years.
Sure.
That was really helpful.
Good.
But it was kind of like, I didn't really see it as me seeking help. It was kind of me like, this is like an opportunity to get out of class.
Right.
I get to just like talk about whatever I want to talk about. And, you know, this is
fair.
Cool. And then I got to a point where my mum literally would like had a breakdown. I was like, you really need to get help. Like, it's not fair on the people around you.
Yeah. Because
I was like really rebellious, and it was like getting to a point where it was like harmful to people.
Yeah.
And I tried CBT, and at that point I wasn't ready to really touch on topics. Like, I didn't feel like there was anything wrong with me. Yeah, I felt fine. I felt like this is life. This is how I am. This is how I choose to be.
Yeah.
I am the way I am because of my past. And I felt okay with that. And so I did maybe like 4 or 5 sessions, stopped it. And then a few years, I say a few years later, like 3 years later, my cousin ended up doing this like development program. It's a 3.5 day conversation, really. And she really stood for me to come to one of the free sessions and try it out. And I was like, what the hell is this like happy hippie American stuff? Like, I'm good. Like, I really don't like, this is weird. Like, this seems like some cult stuff. Like, I'm all right. And then one day I was super bored after uni, and I decided, let's go to one of these taster sessions. Like, fine. Went there. Immediately, like, we started talking about areas of life that weren't working. One of them was like, I don't have the relationship with my dad that I would genuinely love to have.
Sure.
And they got straight into it, man. Like, it was crazy. Like, it was like the craziest hour of my life. And my cousin really stood for me. So she was dead broke at the time. Like, she had just moved back to the UK from Spain. She was living at my grand's house, dead broke, in debt. And she looked at me and she was like, Cami, you really need help. I really, like, I love you so much, and I will pay. Like, if you want to pay me back, you pay me back, but I will pay for this. And I was like, whoa, like, you must really think this is going to be beneficial for me. And I still like fought against it. I was like, okay, maybe I'll do it, but like in a few months. You know, I was a student, I was working part-time, and it was like expensive. Yeah. What I felt was expensive. You can't put a price on these things, man. On like therapy sessions, counseling, personal development program, you cannot put a price on it. It's like, it's just like giving magic to yourself, really. But yeah, I ended up doing it the weekend of my birthday, so I was turning 20, and my life has just completely changed ever since.
But that's beautiful, though. I mean, how we kind of get to those conclusions of bettering ourselves, like you said, self-improvement. One of the things you were saying to me that was starting to stick out to me when you were talking about initially seeking out help, because I deal with this a lot, is readiness. I have to deal with readiness a lot when it comes to when people reach out, because sometimes I get people that they're not really ready to start the process. It's like you gave in your example, it's a relative saying, hey, I see something's wrong. I see you need help. I see this could benefit you. But the person that actually needs it doesn't necessarily see that. So then they're struggling to even be present. They're struggling to focus. They're struggling to put in like the effort necessary to really get something from it. So I get where you're coming from. And I always tell those people, like, it's okay. You shouldn't be ashamed. It's just maybe you're not ready. And I heard you say that a moment ago, which is the other thing that's stuck into my head. I think we have to be ready when we're going to engage in self-improvement, especially if you're going to do therapy, if you want to get anything significant out of it. When you had been going through your personal development and you had started to get to a more stable place working on yourself, did you ever find a time or a point to go back and try therapy again to see if it would be more helpful to you following that first attempt?
Yes. Recently, actually, maybe like 6 months ago, maybe even less, I decided to, there was this one particular area in life that wasn't working for me, which is romantic relationships. And I
Okay.
was like, what is it? Like, what's going on here? This is interesting. And I thought, you know what? Let me seek some professional help.
Sure.
And it was talking therapy. And the more I talked about it, the more I realized I actually know what I need to do. I was just not really willing to be with it, be with some of the facts or some of the things that I knew about myself.
Right.
But really, when I did the personal development course, and because I've been doing it for like the last 5-6 years, I feel like they gave me such great tools that I can use anywhere, anytime, with anyone, in a way that's really effective, you know? So for me, I could say that it's closer to cognitive behavioral therapy. Like when you have a specific area of life that you want to work on, you kind of like create certain, you kind of create a space where you can work on that.
Right.
So it's kind of like having homework. Like you do certain things.
Very
right?
much believe in therapy homework.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Like you can't just like read about it. Like there's no way you're going to read some books or watch some podcasts or like listen to some motivational speaker and think, yeah, like my life is going to be amazing now. Like you literally need to put in the work, and it's really confronting. It's hard. Like it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of holding yourself accountable, which is not easy. Like I need to have accountability partners. I really do.
I'm glad you said it that way too.
At one point, I was so bad. Like this is going a bit like off tangent, but at one point, I was like really bad with going to the gym. Like I hated it. I had zero relationship with the gym, and so I had an accountability partner. I was like, every day, I would either send a picture of my 10,000 steps minimum, or I would send a picture of me at the gym, like doing something, until I built that habit.
Yeah.
And now, I freaking love going to the gym. Yeah. But it took a while.
Absolutely. I will echo that sentiment when it comes to an accountability partner, because I think of that a lot actually in my experience working with clients, that you're asking them to add these new behaviors or tools that they can use in their day-to-day life, but they're new. So like anything that we do that's new, it's hard to make it stick because you're trying to add something into your life. So it's helpful when you at least have one other person, which your therapist could totally be, to help you to be accountable, not from a judgmental standpoint that, oh, you didn't do it, so like, you know, you are disappointing me or you're frustrating me. No, it's more that this is something that we have determined and figured out that this can benefit you. Sometimes when we have somebody else invested in our journey, it helps increase that accountability at times when maybe like we don't want to do it for ourselves.
Absolutely.
But it's like, well, Camila knows that I'm working on this. I don't really care about skipping today. Like I'm talking about the gym, but I don't want to disappoint Camila today. So I'm going to make sure that I just go ahead and do it. That might help me like when I'm in my early stages trying to establish this as part of my routine, if you follow what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we touched on this earlier, like the power of community. So when I started doing this like personal development program, conversation, whatever you want to call it, I found it a lot easier because at the time I had like just broken up with a boyfriend. I was like seriously like depressed. I had severe anxiety. I used to find it super awkward to look people in the eye. Like I remember I was telling you earlier, I was at a house party. Bless my friends, they really wanted me to have that uni experience, and I was like, okay, I'll go. But I was so awkward. Like I would literally like be standing and someone would be like talking to me, and I didn't have it in me to speak back. I lived my life like a complete, for about 3-4 years, I lived my life like as a complete shell of a person, like completely different to how I was when I was younger. So you can kind of think of it as like a group session. The fact that I got to just sit at the back silently was perfect for me because I didn't want to open up. Like I couldn't bear the thought of sharing such vulnerable things to someone, you know, and I had like these constant thoughts of, they're gonna judge me. Like there's no way that they're not gonna judge me. Like I've done some bad shit, or like some bad shit has happened to me, and how can people not judge? But the thing is, the beauty of like the group sessions is some people are so ready to just deal with their shit. They're tired of sitting in their poo. Like they want to just clean themselves. So they're like, listen, I want to share right now. Like, and the person leading like the forum would be like asking questions, kind of like what you do in CBC, ask questions. Right. You inquire, and then people slowly start to like discover things for themselves. And just by listening, I started to like pop, like, oh my goodness, like I can see that for myself too. Like we're not actually that different. So I think, and the more I stuck to doing these courses, the more I found my confidence, the more I wanted to share, and I saw the power of sharing.
Oh, like, yes.
It's so, like, sharing with people who listen, who have the skill of listening, because listening is a serious skill.
Oh, yes. Requires a lot of patience.
Yeah, a lot of focus, you know, to, like, be an active listener.
To be, I consider it, I talk so much, and I'm sure people probably get tired of me saying it, but it's really important. I talk so much about just the level of intentionality when you do something, right? Like you were just saying sharing, right? That's why we're here. Like that's literally why we're recording this, why we're talking about it, why we're being very open. Like I say that all the time because I know that when I was young, like I needed to see this. This is also for me. And anybody that was like me that didn't get to come from that environment and feel like they were encouraged to be open and vulnerable with those around them. So sharing is absolutely important. That's precisely why we're here talking about it. And also because the other part you just mentioned, that's how we recognize so much of the similarities that we have. We would never know that if we never said anything about it to each other. We just look around, we walk, we talk to each other, and we judge everybody. Oh, I bet you she's this way. I bet you he's this way. But we never take the time to sit there and actually ask the person who they are, what they're about, what they went through, how they got to this point. And you might find, wow, there might be way more in common than you actually thought. But we never are willing in those cases to take the opportunity to just ask and be curious.
But do you know what? Why I feel that people don't do that?
Why?
It's because when we're so deep in our own mess, we live in our own bubble. Like we don't even have space for other people and to inquire into other people's life because we're like knee deep in our own stuff. And so that's why it's so important to really, for ourselves, get clear from the past, like really be able to acknowledge whatever needs to be acknowledged, deal with whatever needs to be dealt with, and start to create a future from nothing, like just an empty space, like a new beginning. And start creating the life that you really want.
Yes. No, I cannot agree more. And I think it's like we talk about that, like I remember when we studied psychology, like basic psychology, about the hierarchy of needs. And it's hard to care about, you know, kind of macro level, big picture type issues. It's hard to care about them when you're housing insecure, when you're food insecure, when you're worried about whether you're going to have power in your home.
Is this Maslow's theory?
Yeah. It's hard to care about more than that when you're not even getting those needs met and satisfied, right? So I don't get upset or frustrated with people when I understand that their living situation and circumstances in many cases sort of prohibit them from kind of getting to that point, right? But then there's also a fair amount of us that choose to not deal with our things. That to me is more detrimental because we're actually making a choice in that scenario to say, I'm going to avoid this. I don't want to deal with this. I don't need to address this right now. But there's so many inherent costs to not dealing with it. But sometimes we don't like make those connections because we're not giving ourselves the time to sit with it, to experience it, to reflect upon it. And that's what I mean when I'm saying there is a difference between some people just aren't in the right circumstances to maybe prioritize their mental health or their emotional health, because physical health is all out of whack, right? But what about for those of us that have those things more or less in order, but we still choose to ignore those other things that could probably enhance our quality of life?
You know, it's so interesting you brought up Maslow's theory because I recently was listening to a podcast
Okay.
And they touched on the idea of like Maslow had it like completely the other way around. And so let me know your thoughts, because I found it really interesting.
Sure.
So it's a triangle, right? And your very first like base is it food and shelter?
Yeah.
Food and shelter. And then he said I don't really meet people being depressed and killing themselves over being without food and shelter. Like they may be depressed, but they don't kill themselves. But I meet people who talk about killing themselves because they don't have relationships, like connections with people.
Sure.
So where do we find that? Wouldn't it make more sense to have relationships with people, like connections, like real connections, like the ones that we're talking about, where we're genuinely sharing ourselves, supporting each other, uplifting and empowering each other as like a basis?
Yeah, I think it would be. I mean, to me, it certainly is a baseline that I would want to establish for all of us. What I would say at the same time, though, is that, again, I'm a big environmental guy. Like my idea of thinking is it's environment over biology, in terms of most people are not inherently one way because they were born that way.
Right.
Most people are shaped into who they are from starting when we're really young. That's my way of seeing things. I say that because if I'm looking at a person and saying they genuinely need social connection, absolutely agree. All humans need social connection. Now, some of us value having multiple connections with many people or being in large gatherings more than others. But in general, people are not meant to be isolated.
Right.
Right? But if I put more nuance and context to that circumstance, if I say, hey, people don't harm themselves, people don't threaten to take their lives unless they're missing social connection, I think that's looking at it from one unique perspective. Because what I would say is, if I was in a situation where I was housing insecure or food insecure, I'm probably not worried about my social connection at that time. Because I can kind of give the same, the counterpoint. I wouldn't be worried about it as much because I'm living on the street. Like, even if I wanted social connection right now, I might not be able to get it, because I don't know how it is in the UK, but I will speak for in America. We tend to not treat housing insecure people that great. So I don't think that most people who are on the street, their primary concern is, I need more people to care about me. I'm sure that it would be better if people did, but I think their step one would be like, I need to get a home so I can get food, so I can have some stability, like a baseline, what we're talking about. And then it would be easier for me to have some confidence to actually converse with another person and try to build a relationship. If you get what I mean. Like, I would be looking at the other conditions around that as well, not just, do you need this? Yes, I agree. You need that. We all do. Social connection is vitally important. But at the same time, in this specific scenario, if I'm missing those fundamental pieces, it's going to be hard for me to care that I don't have that. Because all I can see is, I'm hungry. I have no roof and it's raining. You know, I don't have any power. Not having any friends, or maybe not having the greatest family connections, is more of a function of me not having that stability. It's not that because I don't have that instability, or because I don't have that stability, it's going to make me more likely to not want to be here anymore. If you get what I'm saying.
I hear what you're saying. So to reiterate,
sure.
In essence, people, in order to feel confident, they would need to have like a security of a home and food in order to start building relationships.
Yeah,
right?
Especially, and we're just talking about general relationships, right? If I was going to take it a step further, right, which you kind of alluded to earlier, if I was going to try to talk about romantic relationships, particularly if I talked about from a male standpoint, there's certain things that we learn about dating and trying to court women, right? Most men know this. If you don't know this, I will bring it to your attention right now. Most men know that you cannot even attempt to approach a woman if you don't have certain stability points in your life. Meaning, if I don't have a home, if I don't have transportation, if I don't have a stable enough job, stable employment, most women are not going to take you seriously. So I know that I kind of have to get those things together first if I want to create that type of relationship. Now, family, obviously, you don't necessarily need those conditions because they're your family. Friends, it kind of depends on who you choose to try to be friends with. Some people, it might be vitally important. Some might want to still support you even though you're having a hard time. But from the romantic standpoint, we can say with a certain amount of confidence, it's not going to go well if you don't have those basic needs met, because it's going to be hard for a woman to probably want to take you seriously as a potential life partner.
It's so interesting you say that, because from the previous point that you made and this point, one thing that I can see with both of them is that there's a focus on what you have and what you're doing. And one thing that I really like seeing, and one thing that I practice is like the being.
Sure.
So like, yeah, we all have certain set of circumstances or whatever, and we are all doing a few things in order to accomplish, combat, or stop whatever it is that we want or do not want.
Right.
But then do we ever focus on the being? Like you mentioned earlier, in order to be confident, I need to have this and I need to do that. Do you though? And in order to be in a happy, loving relationship, I need to have this and I need to do that. But do you though?
I think what I would say is, I think there's certain things that are, even though we might not want to admit it, there's certain things that are conditional. And this could be my experience, but this is both, I'm speaking both of my personal and my professional experience. So let me use an example of like marriage. It's very commonplace in married couples and relationships, if they're experiencing distress, marital distress, meaning there's a risk that they may split, separate, or divorce. If there's great financial distress, maybe the husband's having a hard time with his job, or there's a risk of him being terminated, that can put a high level of stress on the family unit as a whole, and then the primary relationship, the husband and the wife, or the boyfriend and the girlfriend, right? That comes down to stability.
Right.
If I don't have that stability, it's hard to have that foundation to then build upon, to have that real significant relationship. So then she may ponder if she wants to stick around, because she might be thinking, I'm not saying every woman would, but she might be thinking, I don't know if I want to stay connected to this person if they can't find a way to get out of this or to remedy the situation.
So doesn't that go back to who you're being? So like, for example, you mentioned financial stability. So say you're in a relationship and you're married to someone, and you're significant. Okay, I'll use myself as an example.
Sure.
If I was to be married and my partner has, like, let's say, lost his job and there's no financial security anymore, what would be going through my mind is, yeah, of course, okay, we don't have financial security. And what is he doing about that? Okay, fine. But then my question really is, who is he being in this situation? Like, is his being, his way of being, gonna take us out of this, or is it gonna keep us in this? Because that's my concern.
Okay.
Like, are you someone that's gonna get back on the horse even though you've just fallen off?
Sure.
Or are you gonna sit in your shit and like just wallow in self-pity for a moment, which happens, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But you also have to recognize who you're being in that moment. It's not about, personally, it's not about what you have or what you're doing, because your being is what creates what you're doing, and then in essence what you have.
No, and I would concur with that. I think that to get the things that we want, or to get ourselves in the relationships that we like, to be the type of parents that we want to be, the partners that we want to be, you have to be putting in the effort. You have to be putting in the intentional effort to grow into who you want to become. And then the things that you desire tend to come with that, right? Over time, not immediately. Well, the only reason why I use that as an example is because when it comes to relationships and dating, there's certain things that I've experienced, that I've seen, that I've had these conversations with folks about, and it's kind of like almost like a checklist, right, of criteria. Like everybody's got preferences, right? Like this isn't crazy to imagine. Everybody, even if you don't want to admit it, everybody has certain things that they're hoping to find in a partner. And when I say partner, not even just for a boyfriend, girlfriend, or just dating. If they're more serious and thinking about, I want to build a family and have kids with this person, that list might be a little more extensive, right? Because there might be certain traits that I'm looking for in terms of their general attitude and their disposition and their behavior that might lend them to be a good mother or a good father. So I'm thinking about how I'm going to balance all of that in my mind. But when there's certain things that provide the level of stability that is necessary to build a good family, and that becomes under threat, then it can be difficult to still focus on the fact that this is a good person, or that this person has done so much for our family up until this point, because we're getting into the point of such stress, not just financial, because there's other things that come with that, but we're getting under so much stress at this point that it's going to be very difficult. I might start actually questioning, do I want to be there? Not that I want that to be the case, right? I would want us to find ways to overcome, but I know sometimes terrible things happen, and it's unfortunate. But I do agree with your point that if I'm doing the best that I can do to try to overcome the situation, I would only hope that anybody's partner would say, I see that in you. I'm not going to abandon you, right? How can we overcome this? But it's not always approached like that. Sometimes it's looked at as, what are you going to do? Because if you don't fix this, I don't know if our family's going to make it.
See, this is, I say this is crazy, but this is like a reality, right? Mm-hmm. And it's why it's so important to do stuff like therapy, so that you can have the tools to healthily get out of situations like this.
Agreed.
Because I personally feel like, absolutely, let's say, take yourself as an example, because I know I can answer this for myself very clearly. If tomorrow you lost absolutely everything, knowing yourself, do you think you'll be in that situation for a very long time?
No, because I think I will do anything that I can do to help me not only get out of the situation, but find an alternative way to thrive.
Absolutely.
But I might be down for a period of time depending on how I lost it all. But.
Right, but because that's your way of being, right? Like,
sure.
Like, I don't know how you would describe yourself, but...
Resilient, I would say.
Okay.
I would definitely.
Anything else? Resilient and...
I would also, because of the circumstances of what we're talking about, I would say patient, because if I'm not being patient, then I might not be, it would be harder for me to be resilient to overcome this issue, because I'm like, I need to fix this yesterday, because it's not fixed by tomorrow, I quit. I give up. I'm not going to deal with it. I have to be patient enough with myself to recognize this might not be resolved by tomorrow, but I can try to come up with a tentative enough plan to actually get myself out of this circumstance. If you get what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Can I suggest another thing?
Sure.
For me, what comes up is like integrity, like integral with yourself and integrity with the people around you, because you hold yourself to a level of accountability to get yourself out of the situation. Sure. So when it comes to, like my partner might be completely down right now, but his way of being needs to be, which is a characteristics that I look for in a partner. You have to, for me, of course, I have certain criteria. Like, naturally, we all have a criteria.
Yes, ma'am.
That we look for in a partner. Absolutely. Like, I would never deny something like that. But even when it comes to financial stability, like, I would want my partner to be earning a certain amount, if not equal to mine, thereabouts, so that we can create a life that we want. Not just for ourselves, but for our future family, right?
Sure.
So if I know that this is the sort of partner that I'm choosing, that has these ways of being, that holds themselves accountable, has integrity, other characteristics as well, then it's easier to be in situations like that, because like he'll come out of this, like he'll come out of this winning. Of course, how can he not?
No, I would agree with that point. I think that it's not that we want to make it seem like as soon as a man may in this scenario lose his ability to provide in this maybe unique way, i.e., he lost his job, that she's immediately going to leave. So I don't want to make that seem like that's the point, because I believe and I would only hope that we would want to, as many people would say, maybe not everybody, but many people would say, you're there for the good times and the bad times, right, in your vows. But I would hope that the point would be is that, hey, I am with the type of person, as you said, who is going to try to overcome this challenge. If I'm the other person, how can I support them while they're trying to deal with this? But what I know, or I feel very strongly about, is that person cannot, if this is a man we're referring to, they cannot stay in that position for an extended period of time, because it's going to really create a lot of doubt in that woman, whether or not she wants to stay with him, even if he was a beacon of overcoming challenge and being resilient in his past. If she has to see him struggle for an extended period of time, she might seriously start getting the questions in her mind. Do I want to continue and see this man for what he is at this moment, even though in the past this wasn't who he was?
Then it's so that I think in situations like that, you seek counsel.
I would hope.
Yeah.
I would hope.
Yeah, I would absolutely seek counsel, because it's not something that you take light, especially if you're married.
Yeah, and I didn't even add the other caveat in, if you have children.
Especially if you have children.
That makes it even more difficult, right? Because you don't want to have to, I don't even want to say have, let me scratch that. You don't want to think that that's the best option. Is that, this person isn't figuring it out anymore. So maybe we are better off not being with him in my scenario. Because as we talked about in the beginning, there's serious risk to that when we remove one of those people out of the household. So all this is predicated on if there's a situation where, in many cases, if the man is the main provider, we're not going to say the woman doesn't provide at all, or the wife may not provide at all, but let's say the man is the primary provider. If he loses his ability to provide the way that he normally would, that if he is unable to secure new employment or seriously remedy the situation after an extended period of time, there might be significant doubt in his partner's mind, where she may seriously question if she wants to be there, even if there's kids there, even if there's children there. And so, to your point, I agree. I would only hope we would seek additional counsel. I would hope that not necessarily it has to be me, but somebody like me to give perspective.
Absolutely.
Yes, this man is down. Yes, she may be down. Maybe she's the primary breadwinner. Maybe that situation, it is a difficult spot. But you guys did sign up for the good and the bad, right? So how can we better support each other to keep their family intact? Because that's the best thing that we can do in this time, to ride this wave, to ride it through. Because it doesn't have to your point, what I feel like I'm understanding from you, you don't have to stay down. You might need some more support so that you can get up back on the horse, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the beauty of personal development, seeking out therapy and guidance for yourself, is that you're so clear about who you are as a person. So imagine if there's two people like that. You're so clear about who you are as people. And then when you decide to be in a relationship, to be married, and then on top of that to have children, the foundation that you have is continuous development.
Yeah.
It's like a business. Like, in order to have a thriving business, you need to have a team around you that's going to continuously develop the business. You need to have ideas flowing through, and you need outside perspectives.
Love that.
And you need to have the tools to really combat life, because life is a roller coaster. It's not easy out here.
Oh man, truer words never spoken. It's so important. And I mean, and I'm not trying to always make this seem like it's like a plug constantly for therapy, but it's more to the point of what you're saying. It's good to get perspective sometimes, because I try to talk a lot about the implicit bias that we all have and how it's so strong. It's so strong that when we see situations, when we see environments, everything seems like it must be the way that it appears.
Right.
That's how strong our biases are. Like if I'm looking out this window and I see somebody walking and they're dressed a certain kind of way, in my mind, I've already drawn all the conclusions I need to draw within 5 to 10 seconds. Oh, she must be. He's gotta be. Right? But I don't know them. I didn't even take the time to talk to them. All I'm doing is making snap judgments based on the first impression that I have. I say that because it's important to learn, right? This is very difficult, even for me. It's very difficult to practice often, to learn to look outside of oneself. This is how it appears to me, but I could be wrong. What if it's this, right? That might help me alleviate or release some of that frustration, some of that anger, some of that hostility.
Absolutely.
Like immediately, right? Because I'm like, oh, well, I was about to react this way because that's what I thought you meant. That's what I thought you were trying to say. Then I realized, because I asked you a question or I considered an alternative viewpoint, maybe it was me. Maybe I'm tripping right now.
Yeah.
Right? I would challenge all of us to do that. I challenge myself to do that often. And it is difficult. I don't ever want to make it sound like it's as simple, but I believe it's really necessary.
It's so crazy because one of the main reasons why my dating life was so poor is because I would always jump to conclusions and assumptions. And I never came from a place of like inquiry. Like you said, the judgment was already there. I used to have this coach and she put it perfectly. She goes, as human beings, we walk this earth with color filtered lenses. Everyone has different colored lenses. And what makes those lenses colored? Our past, our which includes our education, our family, past relationships, all these things that accumulate our past. That's what we're seeing life with.
Yeah.
And so no wonder everyone sees things so differently. And why we have these perceptions of how life is, when the reality is, this is going to sound like a bit of like from like an annihilist point of view, but like everything is super empty and meaningless. Like everything is empty and meaningless until we decide to give it meaning.
Right.
And so when I realized I am not inquiring into what's going on for these people that I'm dating.
Right.
I started asking questions like, if I thought someone was annoyed at me or upset with me, or I don't know, I would just ask questions like, how are you? How's everything for you? Like, I feel like there's a bit of hostility there. Am I just like misinterpreting something, or
Right.
like what's happening right now? And instead of just like, you seem like you're pissed off, like it's more like asking questions, and it's made a difference.
I agree. I have like a kind of simple little way of looking at that when it comes to trying to help look outside of oneself. Is I always try to tell all of us and remind myself, especially in the way we choose to speak to each other, right? And again, this isn't just romantic partners, this is anybody. We should try our best to just genuinely be curious about things, right? Because when you're curious, when we ask questions, we're going to be a bit more intentional about maybe softening our approach when we ask a question. We're not going to be as sure of whatever we're saying because we're like, I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Right.
And more importantly, we give the other person the opportunity to speak for themselves, to clarify for themselves, to make their own points. So I won't go and I'll say, this person looks like this, so therefore they must be fill in the blank. I can't make those conclusions because I don't know. I don't know you. I don't know you. I don't know you. Let me take the opportunity to be curious and ask genuinely and pay attention and actively listen and reflect back to them to make sure we're on the same page about whatever it is that we're discussing. Right?
Word. I like that. Yeah.
Like it would be so much easier. And I genuinely try to live that way. I will say, even though it is difficult, I think it makes it easier to not come off very harsh you know,
Yeah, and
to other
it's
people.
beautiful to experience people like that. Like when people,
Yeah.
sometimes I have like a resting. Can I swear?
Yeah.
Sometimes I have a super resting bitch face, and it's not even like I'm moody. Sometimes I'm just like either tired or just thinking, and so my face will be like straight. And I think it's so lovely when people just ask, "Is everything okay? You know, like, has your day been good? Like, you look a bit sad. Has anything happened?"
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "Oh, I'm just thinking right now, but that's so nice of you. Thank you. Like, thanks for asking. That's so sweet. Like, honestly, like
Right.
you didn't have to make any assumptions, or, you know, just asking makes such a big difference."
It does. It does. I'm glad we made this point, because I think if we are able to utilize that really across the board, like in every way that we try to do things, I think we will find not only less judgment, more acceptance, more peace. Because people will allow other people to present the way that they want to be appreciated and valued the way that they want to. And it takes all the onus off of us to like try to always understand, not understand, to fill in the blanks of why people are the way that they are. No, let me ask Camila, what does she mean when she says these things? Why does she use the terms that she uses? How does she choose to interpret the world around her? And what maybe contributed to why she interprets the world around her the way that she does, right? So I'm going to segue into my next question, talking about culture and how that shapes our perception. Because again, I believe that our environment shapes our perception, which shapes our reality. Perception is reality for the vast majority of people. How do you think any part of your culture, however you want to define culture, that can be from your ethnic background, that can be from the geographic region that you grew up in, how do you think culture has shaped your perspective in your life up until this point?
It's interesting because both my parents migrated from Colombia to Russia.
Okay.
Lived in Russia for 10 years, thereabouts, and then moved to the UK. And so I would say that my parents aren't like your traditional folkloric sort of Colombian person in terms of like they're not religious, they're not super strict about things.
Yeah.
Like mom's a doctor and my dad's like a politician / teacher / like human activist. So they're pretty open to having conversations that I want to say not, at least the Colombians that I've been around aren't as willing to have. Okay. So I've been very lucky in that sense.
Beautiful.
And they've always given me such liberty to explore life.
I would say there is aspects of culture in there though, and that maybe because they're non-traditional and they are well traveled, I'm sure, like you're saying, that has added to your outlook.
Yes, definitely. So because both my parents are quite well traveled, they have a level of education that's allowed them to really thrive in different communities.
Sure.
That's something that I was like able to grow up and see. Like, oh wow, like he doesn't just stick with this one group. Like he goes and she goes to all these other different communities and has interactions with them, and that's been really profound in my life because I find myself doing that now. Like we even the way we met is quite unconventional, and I think like the typical person, or like maybe like I don't want to say typical person, but some people would never just have conversations with a random person and be like, let's do a podcast together, like, you know. No. Like it's
very, very factual. Yeah,
right. Like, but I think the fact that I also grew up in London town, which is super multicultural, like it's a melting pot, it's amazing. I love London. I got to grow up with so many different type of people, like people from different backgrounds, different ethnicity, speaking different languages, practicing different religions. It allowed me to be exposed to all of these things and question and investigate, and learn for myself what resonates, what doesn't.
Sure.
So that was really, really cool. growing up as a British Colombian, it's really different to the US. Like, there's quite a large Latino population in the US.
Very true.
We still have to tick like other in census boxes, because we're such a small population in the UK. Like, we are a growing population, but we're still really, really small.
Okay.
Even like Black African and Black Caribbean is relatively small in the UK. There's a large like brown, Asian, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi population.
Okay.
So even that was a bit weird, because what do you mean other? I'm not other. Like, that doesn't even make, what's other?
It's interesting you say that too. I'm sure there will be some listeners and viewers who have parents from two different ethnic backgrounds or come from two different parts of the world, myself included. But it's interesting you said other, because that kind of takes me back to when I was a kid. Not that other, multi-ethnic, multiracial children didn't exist, but it just wasn't as common or as prominently displayed maybe. But when you talked about that box, you remind me of like when I had to do standardized tests, and there used to not be like a box where you could choose multi-ethnic, but also they didn't like it when you checked more than one box. So then you had to check other. And that used to be a thing for me, where I always check other than I would write in like multiracial, multi-ethnic. But just because I'm like, I feel like that conceptualizes better, who I am. But it's interesting that you're telling me that, especially for Americans, I think we're maybe not all as privy to how the population demographics are in the UK, that there's not as many Latinos, even though I do know that, Spain's probably the closest Latin country there as compared to America. We have not only Mexico, but Central and South America that are all right pretty close by.
Yeah. Like, the Latin community is quite small, but it's growing, and it tends to be a very tight-knit community. Like, we have like pockets of Latin communities around London, and it's actually really beautiful, because we have like festivals now, like maybe we had like a festival called Carnaval del Pueblo.
Okay.
And that used to run, and then it stopped maybe like, I want to say like 10 years ago now. And it only started again this year. So you can see like the Latin scene is growing. It's definitely growing. Even when I hear Latin music being played in different countries, like I was in PP Island not that long ago, and they were playing reggaeton, and I was like, oh my God, like, this is my vibe. Like, this is like, I can't believe I'm in Southeast Asia and they're playing reggaeton. This is so cool to me. I love it. Yeah, because we're really like, I'm not that used to it in London so much, even though you have like your Latin hubs that are really pushing for the scene to come out, which is amazing, and we can see the advancement in it, for sure.
No, absolutely. I'm glad you said that too, because you made me think of like when I was growing up, but I would say like maybe my early 20s. Like, I remember Daddy Yankee was like very big coming from Puerto Rico, so like I remember that was like a important breakthrough. We're seeing more of that and hearing more of that sound. But now, you got like the J Balvins and the Bad Bunnies out there. So, I mean, I think it's good to see, that blending of culture. Even I would say in America, like just the fact that like K-pop has gotten fairly large. Like, I'm hearing people saying like, oh yeah, I love BTS and these other bands. And I'm like, I don't listen to it, but I respect the fact that like other people want to embrace that culture, because South Korea is very far from us. Yet their music spans, and it's not like as Americans we don't know that our culture touches other parts of the world. So I think it's cool when we're sharing, more of that and feeling more of that, like we were talking about earlier, like feeling some of that camaraderie. Music, I think, is one of those great mediums that can help bring more of us together, and especially in appreciation, right? Like you're saying, like, hey, I'm in an Asian country and there's an reggaeton, like, oh, do they even understand the words? Maybe not. Maybe they just like the beat. But the fact is they have an appreciation, and that's part of my culture, and I like that they are willing to embrace that.
Something did come up for me with regards to like answering the question. One thing I did notice growing up was that Latinas were really hypersexualized. I really noticed that from really
in the UK?
early. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but definitely like in London, yeah, we're super hypersexualized, and I think I noticed that like 13, 14. And so at first I like kind of played into it, you know, because well, I wanted to be part of that, like the cool Latinas.
Yeah.
And then I was like, what the fuck is this? Like I got to a point where I was like, I don't want to be associated with these certain attributes that you're just presuming all Latinas have. Like, even though I can dance, I love dancing, but not all Latinas can dance, and that's okay. Sure. And you shouldn't just make that assumption just because they're from somewhere. So what I ended up doing was like almost like dissociating myself with my culture for a little bit. So yeah, like I just wouldn't hang around with the Latino community. Like I just wouldn't really want to go to the events. I just didn't want to be part of that. And I didn't like the conversation of when someone asks you where you're from.
Yeah.
They would, like, I knew I was about to be treated differently. If I was to say, yeah, I'm like Indian or Bengali, I would be treated differently than if I'm to say I'm Colombian. And that's wild to me.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That you pointed that out. And there's a lot of ways to take that particular topic. But I do know that I've heard stories especially from some women that I knew growing up, that in America, I know that black women were hypersexualized for a very long time. You know, some of it fallout from slavery, but just the idea that like the assumptions that people presume and cast onto other people, that, you know, like all people behave this way or that they do this way. I usually say this on this show that no people are a monolith at all. Now there's common lived experiences that we can share. Right? Like Latinos can have certain lived experiences that we may have in common, but it doesn't mean that they all manifest exactly the same, because each culture within the country can portray it a little differently. Right. Just like language, even though it's the same common like Spanish language, it still can be, there's some variation depending on where you came from and how you learned it. So I think it's important to understand that importance, the way that may show up. Right? There are going to be some unique differences. I do think it's interesting when you have the specific minority populations that sometimes, because it is more foreign, to use that specific word, that can come with being, I don't know if that's the exact word, but kind of like exotified or to be presumed that way.
Yeah.
Because I know for some people, like Asians can be perceived that way because it may not be as common to, like in America, to be around them. Right. And so you might put them in that box. The same way you're talking about Latinos might be looked at in the UK. But I do think at the same time, to combat that, my hope is that with more people becoming more integrated with, you know, especially with the level of social media that we see as well, like it's not as foreign or as uncommon to hear that people have friends from other backgrounds, that people have relationships with other backgrounds, we procreate with each other from other backgrounds, that there creates more acceptance, and hopefully that particular feeling starts to die down a bit. But I do acknowledge though that there's still some countries that are like very, very concentrated, so are like of the majority.
Okay.
So it might be like there's going to be some moments where it's like, hey, this is still going to kind of happen. And it's unfortunate, but I'm hopeful that it's not going to be as big of an issue as time progresses.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, but you taught me something, because I didn't know that. I did not know that. Because, yes, coming from America, it's definitely not. Latinos are actually the largest ethnic minority.
Right. So I can imagine it being different, because it's like you see a lot more Latinos. Whereas in London, it's like, oh my God, you're Colombian, you're Ecuadorian, you're Brazilian. Like, that's so exotic.
Right.
It's like, oh, get out of here, man. Stop it. Like, what the hell?
No, absolutely. And, you know, and I'm appreciating the conversation. This is the nuance, right? Like I usually make this expression, like some of us, when we are trying to like understand something, it's easy for us to fall into extremes. The black and white thinking, you are this or you are that. And I always say, for me, I'm like, because I learned this in school when I was learning to be a therapist, that life is gray. Life is gray, meaning it's a combination of the two. It is not everything is this or that, or everything falls neatly into one or two categories. Everything requires context. Everything requires perspective. Everything requires nuance. So then we have to be patient right? And ask those questions and be curious. Because then we understand things better, more accurately. Not just, this is how it appeared to me, so I'm just going to put this on you and then keep moving. Just like you said a moment ago, me being sexualized because I'm Latina in the UK. But what if I'm not? What if that's not the trope that I want to play into just because I happen to be from this ethnic background and grow up in this country? Do I have to? Is that fair to put that upon me?
It's an interesting thought, because that's literally what I did. Like, I became so dissociated. But then there's so many aspects of like what a typical Latina is or does that I also do, and so I've almost like suppressed myself from like really embracing my culture, which is crazy because my culture is awesome.
Listen, because I can make a direct parallel. We did touch on this on the first time we tried to do this, but I think this is important to echo. This is the similar sentiment to me hearing you say that to how Black people may feel when we don't have that connection to our homeland, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? Because you know, our identity can be tied to, you know, growing up where we grow up, in our case, talking about in America, but then still not feeling necessarily wanted, but then not necessarily knowing that history and that lineage that you're directly connected to, right? Because of obviously what happened in the past. So I think it's interesting when you're thinking about culture, and you're thinking about acceptance and thinking about values and judgments and assumptions, like all these important things that we're touching on, right? Is to try to like be patient and understanding with each other while we're all going through that journey, like going through that process of self-discovery. Who am I? What does that mean? How do I formulate that vision of who I am as an individual, how I want to contribute to my society, the type of family I want to build, the type of relationships I want to have? It's all very nuanced and complicated. Sometimes we need help, in many cases, to learn how to formulate what that even means, you know? And so I think it's important to give each other and give ourselves that space, like while we're going through that process, especially being in your age, right? You're 25. To me, this is like peak. I'm starting to dig into myself to figure out who I am. This is like the meat of that time to say, I need to look in the mirror and really start to figure this out. Because maybe around the corner, possibly, is I want that family. So I want to know what I'm going to bring into that family. So I need to figure that out first.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm going to use that as a segue. You were talking about this before, but I want to kind of try to go back into that. So when we're talking about relationships, you obviously being a woman, talking about relationships with men, do you think you could say this either maybe in your past with like past relationships, or you can talk about it in the present? Have you noticed any really significant challenges when it comes to communicating with a man or a male partner?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think my first ever relationship, I didn't know how to communicate. Because I wasn't in a place, firstly, mentally, physically, to be in a healthy relationship. Communication was definitely impacted.
Yeah.
And because we were so young, it like fizzled and erupted.
Yeah.
And that had an impact on my life, to the point where I didn't even really want to communicate like my genuine feelings for people. And so my communication would always kind of be like in hidden messages, like encrypted. Like I'm telling you something, but I'm not really telling you something, but I'm kind of hoping you're going to understand what I'm getting at. And it was mostly like coming from like a place of fear of like not wanting to be rejected, or like this is too good to be true. So because it was all coming from a place of fear, communication wasn't really there. It wasn't present.
Right.
I feel like I'm finally in a place where I can like healthily communicate what it is that I want, because I know what I want.
Good.
Before, I didn't even know what I thought I knew what I wanted, but I wasn't even in a place to accept that from someone because I wasn't even really giving that to myself.
Good awareness.
And furthermore, I hadn't really been around healthy relationships, so I couldn't really envision what that looked like. And the more I've been around like people who, not only just like people in relationships, but like healthy people, like people who really know themselves, who are very loving, very caring, I've also been able to embrace that about myself. Like, I think I'm naturally very affectionate when I care about people. And before, I used to think like, ew, like I would never really hug people. I wasn't very affectionate. But what I'm getting at is, the more I've been able to accept that within myself, embrace it, nurture it, the more willing I am to be that way with other people, and the more willing I am to communicate how I feel, and it just flows so much more easily. Like, because I'm clear about what it is that I want, what I see for myself in the future, the sort of marriage I want to have, like how I would like to raise my kids. Like, when I'm looking for someone to date, like, some of the questions I'll be like, are you open to having therapy for yourself? And then if we're in a relationship, like, are you open to us having couples counseling, therapy?
Beautiful question.
Because for me, I want to know that we're in this together, like, because there's going to be moments where I don't know what the hell I'm doing, you don't know what the hell you're doing. We need like support.
Sure.
So I find that the more I know what I want for myself, for my future self, my future family, the more I can just ask. And if that person doesn't align with me, that's absolutely fine.
Yes.
We don't have to carry on, like, we don't have to move on forward. But what it also does, it gives it creates a space where there's an opportunity where they can like question, like, maybe I can do that. I'm willing to do that, you know? I'm like, sweet, that's sick. I like that.
Absolutely. I mean, I appreciate the honesty there. I mean, I would only hope that we would seek out people that are willing to not only look beyond themselves, but also understand that there's going to be moments of extreme challenge where I might not have the answer, you might not have the answer, and I'm okay with getting that outside perspective, getting that outside assistance. I am seeing that is becoming more accepted, which is very exciting for me, not just because of my profession, but because I just want us to be more healthy together, and hopefully seeking out, people like that. But when you're talking about like kind of going through that experience, like one of the things you said that like really just stuck out to me, it's like you were seeking out things that you necessarily weren't maybe willing to give at that time, but also you weren't even providing to yourself at that time. That to me is so profound, because you're definitely not the only person that has done that before. And this is like this little sort of mantra, I guess you could say, that I like to say to myself and to others is, I always want to give and put out what I want to receive. So if I want love, I need to give it. If I want respect, I need to give it. I can't wait for other people to give it to me first, and then hope that I'm going to then want to give it back to them because, well, it's like a power thing, right? So once they give it to me, then I feel like I'm in a better position, because maybe I don't want to offer it then. Maybe I'm like, no, I want you to give to me and I just want to take.
Oh.
Right? I'm like, no, but doesn't it feel better if you say, you know what? I'm going to lead with respect. So I'm going to sit down here with you. I'm going to treat you like you're a human being, like I respect you as an individual, because then it makes it easier for me to say, yes, and I desire that in return. You're good. I'm like, I want that in return because I give it to you freely, right? I find that it's an easier way of being. It's an easier way to say, this is what I want. I desire great communication, so I'm going to try my best to always communicate well, because then I can look at you and say, please communicate with me well. Like, I hope you see how much I try to understand, to be patient, to listen, to not interrupt, to truly understand, right? What do you think about that?
I think it's a beautiful way of being. and to encounter people who are also in that stage is amazing. But one thing I've realized is I don't believe in like right people, wrong timing. That's not the right person for you. If it's meant to be your person or someone you share something with, it's going to be the right person and the right time. And anything that doesn't fit into that, well then it doesn't. The question I ask myself, does this work for me?
Sure.
In my life? And does this work for you in your life? Because one thing that I've noticed is it's so easy to try and create a relationship with someone based on relationships that we've already had. So like we take like the learning and the inquiry just completely out of it. Like I only discovered this recently, but the way I give love is completely different to how I want to receive love.
Okay.
And the person I've been dating is pretty much the same. Like they receive love and give love in different ways. And I never would have even guessed that unless we would have actually asked ourselves those questions.
Right.
Like ask each other those questions. And it's really creating a space of like being inquisitive about each other and really coming from a space of like, is this actually going to work?
Right.
You know, like, do we want the same things or are there things that not even compromise on, but like, are you willing to look at it from this perspective and see why I would want to do that? And am I willing to do the same? Because it's important. Because I'm not out here dating for the sake of just being in a relationship. I'm dating for like family.
Right.
Like I'm like, the next person I say, yes, I want to be with you, is because I genuinely see that this is my partner.
Sure.
And we can have a family together. Because there's no way I'm going to be in a relationship with a man who I don't think would be a good role model for my kids, for our children.
Right. I mean, that's part of being intentional, right?
Intentional.
Like I'm thinking about, what do you bring to the table at this particular moment for what I'm looking for? And same for me. What do I bring to you? And does that fit what you need? And hopefully we sync up in that way. And no relationship is foolproof, right? All of them take work. But I'm hoping that I am decreasing the likelihood or the probability that we are going to end up in significant distress because we have such a good starting point that we're launching off on. We have such good communication, and we've made it a priority to say, I always want to communicate well with you. If we start dipping, let's make sure that we start figuring out what is going on so we address it immediately. Not, we're going to go months and months and months and maybe years. Our communication is terrible, and we're wondering why we're on the verge of divorce or why we're separated currently. Well, because those things have been happening. Maybe we lost sight of that. Maybe we sought out people who weren't giving us those things that we know that we truly needed. And that's contributed to why we are where we are today.
Right.
So your point, extremely valid. If we're going to date, if we're going to be with somebody, let's be with people that we truly desire, not just because of how they appear, but thinking about what we want for the long term. For those of us that want children and want families, it's important to understand I have to be able to build a solid foundation with this person, not only because I need them to be well and I need to be well, because we are role models and examples to those young ones who are going to be watching us the entire time we raise them. It's so pivotal that we cannot understate and not fully appreciate how much children watch and they observe. And the more healthier we are as individuals, I'm going to make one little point on top of this. To me, there is a hierarchy of who's most important in our lives. Okay? This is the way I usually say it to continue on this point. Let's say it's me as an individual, I'm married, and I have a child or I have children. I always say, because I believe this is true, that we have to always be number one, the individual. So Camila is her number one to herself always. I am number one to myself always. Then, because that's me as an individual, then it gets to the relationship. So, because I said in this scenario, I'm married. Then it is my marriage and my relationship with my wife. And then after that, it is my relationship and us as a family unit.
Okay.
And the reason why I believe that order is in that particular order is because the family cannot be well if the primary relationship foundation is not well, meaning me and my spouse. The relationship between me and my spouse cannot be well if I am not well. So everything is predicated on, do I take good care of myself? When I need help, do I seek it out? Do I have good support systems around me? So when I'm in certain situations, I know where to go. But what I see that really screws us up at times is there's a too much of a focus on one aspect or another. Maybe I really embrace being a dad. So I kind of let me as a person fall to the wayside because I'm trying to get so much fulfillment being a dad or being a husband. And I forget to do the things that bring me joy just by myself as an individual. Same thing for the woman. You follow what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I think it's important that we never lose sight of that because we are complex people.
Right.
We're not just women and men. We're not just mothers and fathers. We're not just husbands and wives. You may be all of those together. So you got to satisfy and fulfill all aspects of who you are. Otherwise, it might be very difficult to stay in these relationships.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think you've touched on some really important points, like making sure that you as an individual, you're setting yourself up to be the sort of partner you want to be for your partner and for your kids. And then also what comes up for me out of this conversation is as a significant other, I think it's, especially in like dating phases, to not fall in love with potential.
That's huge what you just said.
That doesn't make sense because your idea of what potential this other person could reach, if they don't see that for themselves, it's hard. You could push, you can even pull for their greatness. You could stick by them and really have them fulfill on certain things, but that's draining. And also expectations, especially uncommunicated expectations of one another. Like, I think it's okay to have expectations of your partner.
Sure.
Because, you know, like if I come home, for example, I don't know, this is theoretical, but I could expect a meal, you know, from you Mondays to Wednesdays. That's an expectation that we've communicated to each other. So if you don't fulfill on that, then we need to talk. Like, where's
the breakdown?
Yeah, where's the breakdown? Like, where is the breakdown? But if it's like uncommunicated expectations, like, that's where it can get a bit funny because I didn't know you wanted me to cook Monday through to Wednesday, babe. Like, my bad. Like that I can understand why you're pissed off. Shit.
Yes. And no, and even thinking about what you said, right? Like, I love that you hit on expectations because I think so much about disappointment and frustration. A lot of times it does boil down to the fact that we don't share that information with each other. And then we wonder why we get pissed off. It's like, well, did you really make sure that he understood what you meant when you said, this is really important to me? Did he make sure that she understood that I really need this from you? Did we sit down and make sure we clearly communicated what we need from one another? Because if we don't, then we should not be surprised that we're going to get frustrated and disappointed because we didn't make sure that we mutually agreed that this is something that we need to create and then maintain. So sometimes I think we set ourselves up for failure because it's kind of like if you were trying to build a house, it's like you got a shaky foundation, you know, you're building this out of sand instead of concrete. Like, why would you do that? That's not going to give the best results. It might work for a little while, but that's not really what you want. You want it to be solid. And more importantly, everybody wants to be understood. Let's not get it twisted.
Yeah, for sure.
Everybody wants to be understood, but sometimes we don't take the time to make sure we're being understood, like that we give that to each other, right? I got to sit here just like we've been doing. I got to listen to you. I got to ask follow-up questions. You have to ask me follow-up questions. I got to make sure we maybe reflect back to each other, right? That we understand. That takes time. That takes energy.
Literally.
I have to be thoughtful to do that, right?
Yeah.
But I think if we take that sort of approach, like overall, we're vastly increasing the likelihood that we can stay together, probably for the test of time until we're no longer here.
Yeah. And this brings me back to just seeking counsel, seeking therapy in general. Because if you're in a place where you're like, you're fulfilled, like as a woman, I am fulfilled in what I do in life. And I know that I'm ready for a relationship. But let's say a year ago, there's just no way. Like, I thought I was ready for a relationship, for dating, but not really. And it translated so much in my dating life.
Yeah.
Like, looking back, it was so obvious that I wasn't ready, but I wasn't willing to accept that.
Fair.
And it took seeking counsel to be like, oh, yeah, I really have like these expectations of people, and I wasn't okay with like letting go of situations because I thought it could work out for the best, you know.
That kind of speaks back to what you were talking about with the potential, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Like, instead of seeing kind of what's in front of us, not that potential doesn't matter, but what are you seeing now? Like, maybe that potential could be manifested and created eventually, but is this person like walking a path to like actually realize, or what we would say actualize that potential? Or are you just looking at it and saying, I'm really hoping for the best here. Yeah. Maybe if I put the right conditions around them, maybe they'll get there. But the signs aren't showing that this person is actually working on that at this moment. So we have to be very, very conscious of, this is what I'm dealing with. Is this really what I want to be dealing with for the long term? Yes or no? And if the answer is not truly yes, then don't waste your time, because you're probably going to get really frustrated, and the situation might devolve a lot more than you probably had planned for.
Yeah. And it's not always easy to be like, yeah, maybe this isn't the person for me. Because, like, I don't know, I can't speak for other people, but for myself, it's always like, I have such high hopes. Like, I always see the potential in people.
Sure.
But it's the art of being unattached to outcomes is powerful. It's so powerful, because I can really like someone. Like, I could think they're amazing. And as soon as maybe there's like one or two things that we definitely don't align with, I gotta keep it stepping, my brother. Gotta keep it stepping.
That's facts. I mean, I hope, because we try to talk about this a lot on the platform, especially when it comes to relationships and families, that I hope that people who are listening and watching may understand, as individuals, man, we're so inherently complicated. And because we are, then inherently relationships will be. Right? That's just trying to be logical from that standpoint.
Yeah, for sure.
So that means that the best thing that I can do if I want to be ready for these relationships is let me make sure, to Camila's point, that I'm doing my work in between that. I don't have to be dating to try to be the best version of myself.
Right.
I can still be getting myself mentally and emotionally and physically prepared for the life that I want, right? So that way, when it does present, maybe I'm ready to embrace that opportunity because I can see it, right? Because I'm more ready for it. Right. I see it walking there. I'm going to jump on it right now.
Yeah.
But if I'm in my own head, if I got all this stuff going on that I don't address, the opportunities are around me, but it's almost as if they're invisible to me. Because I got so many other things on my mind, so much on my heart, like I just can't even fixate on it. So the purpose of having these discussions is to recognize if you see that you're struggling in these areas, if you understand that I've had past relationships, or I struggle with communicating with my children, or I get a lot of feedback that I'm not very open with how I'm feeling, that might be the sign to say, I need to get some help. I need to consider a different viewpoint. Maybe if I'm not seeing that I'm feeling happy and the people around me that I value are feeling particularly happy, then maybe I need to try to do something different about it. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah. I would say if you're feeling extra brave, extra courageous, and extra open to taking on any sort of personal development, I would highly recommend you ask maybe 5 people that you really love and trust, and ask them, let them know that you you're asking them these questions because you really want to take yourself on, you want to discover something new, and that you won't hold it against them. You cannot hold it against them, guys. Like, you have to ask from a place of genuine inquiry, okay?
Yes.
And really create the space for them to be honest with you, because it can be hard. And then ask them, what do you feel are my strengths? What do you feel are my weaknesses? How do you think people see me? Ask them those 3 questions. Be inquisitive about what comes up. And sometimes it doesn't mean you have to take anything on.
Sure.
Just because someone says, oh, your weakness is X and Y, you can be like, oh, I already knew that. That's fine. Like, you don't have to do anything about it. But it's good to see, because sometimes it's hard to observe things about ourselves.
Yes.
Because they're complete blind spots. It's like when you're driving, there's always a point in the car where you cannot see anything and you need someone to help you, like, navigate so that you don't crash and kill somebody. So that's what I would suggest.
Good.
And play with that.
I love that. No, I love that. And yeah, having that awareness is very, very important. And understanding that, yes, to your last point, there are going to be things that I may not be able to observe about myself because I am myself. Going back to the implicit bias. Because sometimes we don't know how we come off to other people unless you want to be brave enough and ask. Yeah. Here's another question I would add to the mix. How do you experience me?
Oh, I love that one.
And this isn't like just if I'm going on a date, it could be like, again, just trying to build a friendship. What's it like to communicate with me, to spend time with me, to learn more about me? Is it easy? Do I make it difficult? Am I an open book? Am I quite guarded? I think it's good to get that feedback. Again, like you said, start with people that you trust, that you feel that are going to be honest with that feedback, but not try to be overly punitive or critical of you, but genuinely constructive feedback that you can try to do something with, right? I think that can always be helpful. And just be willing, to me, is like starting that process. I always talk about journaling because I'm a very big advocate of that when it comes to therapy, because it gives you the space to reflect. So even if you're just listening to this or watching this and you're like, I don't know if I have all those particular issues. Some stuff came up when Camila made this point or when I made this point, but I'm not really sure if I have all these particular issues, but I am going to start to give myself the space to try to capture more of what I'm experiencing in my days. And then maybe I might see a pattern.
Right.
A pattern of how I think or a pattern of how I behave, maybe a combination of the two. I think that's like a helpful starting point. If you don't have somebody there to work with, or if you're not necessarily ready to start working with somebody like you brought up earlier, we got to start somewhere though.
Yeah.
So hopefully that helps anybody out there to begin the process. And the second most important part is having these conversations and being willing to engage, which you have. So I want to very much say thank you for all the vulnerability that you provided, because to me it's so important for us to visualize and see this. Going back and using your words, it is hard to envision things that you don't see, that are not around you. If I don't see men and women communicate when I'm growing up, it's very difficult then for me to know how to do that in my relationship. I don't even know how to approach it, right?
Or you might not even know that that's a thing.
Right. It could be completely a blind spot.
Yeah.
Could be completely oblivious to it. So I'm hoping that you see this and you're like, you know what? Maybe this is a healthier way of me engaging, because I heard her say some good points. I heard him say a point and it resonated with me. Beautiful. Let's use that as a starting point. So I appreciate you for being here. I'm glad that we had the spontaneousness of coming together and having this beautiful discussion, even with all the technical difficulties that we have had. And I hope that anybody that's gotten value from this would consider subscribing and following all of this good content that I am trying to make, because at the end of the day, this is about trying to help us lead better lives. With the work that I do, I know how impactful it can be when people are ready to do the work. But I'm hoping that this can be that maybe gentle push in the right direction, right? Because you choose to be here. You're choosing to watch this. You're choosing to listen to this. So I hope that if that's the case, that gives you that subtle more push and encouragement to start making that change for the better. And until next time, we're going to sign off, and I hope that everybody has a lovely day.